Last year, my roommate moved out of the house we had rented together for 4 years. At that time, both of us had secured better jobs and higher salaries. The house we lived in wasn't the best, so it was only a matter of time before one of us moved to have our own place. After he moved out, I decided to stay there for another year or two. This incident happened in early December, during a severe snowstorm in our area. My workplace provided the option to work from home for a few days. Of course, I chose to take that offer. I used my former roommate's room as my office and worked throughout the day. One day, while I was working, there was a knock on the front door. I opened it and was greeted by a blast of snow and wind. I asked, "How can I help you?" The man smiled, apologized for disrupting my day, and explained his situation. He said his car was stuck in the snow right next to my house, and he didn't have a phone. Skeptical, I asked him to wait for a moment. I closed the door, went to the other side of the house, and looked out the window. There was a small SUV that seemingly slipped onto the sidewalk and was trapped in a snowbank. Now convinced that he wasn't lying, I grabbed my jacket and shoes and returned to the front door. I was still somewhat skeptical, but I stood on the porch with him as he used my phone to call his brother. After a brief call, he returned my phone, thanked me, and left. I went back inside and checked the window, seeing him getting into his car. I thought everything was done. Around 7 p.m., I felt I had done enough work and took the rest of the evening. That's when I remembered the man and his car. I went to check, but was surprised to see his car still there, and I could see him moving inside it. It had been almost 3 hours since we first met, and I wondered how he could still be there. Perhaps he was waiting for his brother to come home from work to pick him up. I didn't know. But I went to the kitchen, made dinner, and sat on the couch watching TV. I stayed awake until around 9:30, then went upstairs to shower and get ready for bed. I turned on the water in the bathroom and entered. A few minutes later, there was a loud knock at the front door. It was so loud and sharp that I was instantly startled and froze in fear. The knocks were so forceful that they made the walls vibrate, and throughout the house, I could hear that they were coming from the front door. They kept pounding on the door vigorously, and I could even hear them aggressively shaking the doorknob. It was a sudden burst of chaos, making it difficult for me to know what to do. I turned off the shower and quickly got dressed. However, as I came out of the room and walked down the upstairs hallway, everything stopped. There was only silence, no more sounds at all. I stood still, only hearing the wind outside and feeling the tension in the air. Slowly, I walked downstairs and approached the front door. There was no one there anymore. I immediately ran to the window, seeing the car still there, but the man wasn't inside. Not knowing what to do, I called the police. When they arrived, they saw different shoe prints in the snow, but they were covered by the snowstorm. They noted his car's license plate and found a picture of the owner. From what I saw, it was the same person I had helped on my porch. In the following days, they waited for him to show up, but as far as I know, he never did. It's disturbing to think about what could have happened that night outside my door. Was it the same man trying to get in for some reason? Or was there someone else with more malicious intent? Most people believe that it was a man seeking help, but what happened afterward remains a mystery. No one really knows about that night, where the man is now, or what he was running from. It's a set of unanswered questions that may never be solved. In January, I rented a winter cabin on the edge of a lake for ice fishing. It was a very small cabin with only basic amenities, intended for people like me who enjoy going to the lake for ice fishing or hunting in winter. I usually bring friends with me. but sometimes I go alone and have never had any problems before. I plan to stay for 3 days with no other plans than sitting by the lake and fishing. When I arrived, I set up my belongings in the cabin and made myself comfortable by making hot coffee and relaxing in front of the fireplace all afternoon. The cabin consisted of only one room, so the bed, fireplace, and everything else were in one area. I went to bed early and woke up at 7 a.m. to go to the lake. It was a snow-covered trail for about 10 minutes from the cabin through a small path surrounded by trees. Upon reaching the lake, I found a good spot, set up my equipment, drilled through the ice, and started fishing. I felt very peaceful just sitting there and fishing, even though I knew many people find it boring. I stayed at the lake for a few hours, maybe 3 or 4 hours, then packed up my belongings as the snow began to fall harder and the wind picked up. I walked out of the lake and back to the trail, but soon I noticed footprints in the snow walking alongside my previous tracks. They led directly to the edge of the lake where I had been, then turned around and headed back to the trail towards the cabin. Feeling a bit uneasy that someone was there and possibly watching me, I decided to follow the tracks and see where they led. Most of the tracks followed the trail back to the cabin, but instead of going to the cabin, they turned into the woods. More confused and somewhat anxious, I returned to the cabin and warmed up in front of the fireplace. There was no one else here but me, and knowing that the trail was the only access, there was something strange about someone being there and walking around the lake in the middle of winter. I made food and stayed in the cabin throughout the night, keeping the fireplace lit, and mostly just reading. But about an hour after sunset, I heard movement outside, very light footsteps in the snow. I moved to the window and saw a figure near a tree. They were wearing thick clothing that covered their entire body, making it difficult to see any details. As they reached the trail, they turned and began approaching the cabin. I lowered my head, watching their shadow on the wall. They stopped, as if looking into the cabin, but then they stopped. I saw their eyes staring at me. I jumped away, now standing a few feet from the window, while the person tried to open it. I ran and grabbed a knife nearby, but after a few attempts to open the window, the person fled. I saw their shadow disappear into the same snowy woods where I had seen tracks before. After that, I quickly packed my belongings and left the place just a few minutes later. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but they knew I was there after seeing me at the lake and intentionally came back in the middle of the night to try to enter through the window. Fortunately, I survived without injury, but I'm sure that night almost became my last night. In January 2020, when I was 18 years old during winter break, I signed up as for a DoorDash because some of my friends were doing it. I didn't really need the money as I was still in high school and living with my parents, but it was more about having something to do, and a few $100s a week sounded good for a teenager. The first few nights went smoothly, and I got used to it after 3 or 4 initial orders, turning it into a regular routine. In the second week, I started working more, eager to make money for the first time and trying to get as much as possible. My friends were doing the same, and they mentioned that on days with bad weather, you usually make more money. So, one night when it started snowing, I decided to work and make some deliveries. During the first hour, I was video calling with one of my friends as we both drove around. However, he stopped and went home around 8. Since it was a Saturday, I could stay out as much as I wanted. But by 10 o'clock, I started feeling bored. I received one more order, grabbed the bag, and drove to the neighborhood where the order was. Snow had covered everything, making it difficult to drive and hard to see house numbers. I carefully navigated down the street until I finally found the correct address. It was a 2-story suburban house that still had Christmas lights on the tree outside. I parked, turned on the hazard lights, and got out of the car. I double-checked that the bag was complete as I walked up the driveway. But when I got near the porch, I noticed the front door was open. Not fully open, but enough to be strange given the snow and cold. I assumed the door was open so I could leave the bag inside the house rather than outside in the snow. So when I reached the door, I pushed it a bit more open and slipped the bag inside. However, as I took out my phone to take a photo as proof, I heard a woman's voice screaming from across the house. She asked if I was the delivery person bringing her order. Her voice sounded like a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. "Yeah, I left it here on your doorstep," I replied without expecting a conversation. The woman immediately responded, asking me to open the door and bring the bag to her. I knew it was strange to be asked to enter their house, but I opened the door just to see where they were. Outside the entrance, there was a long hallway leading to what I assumed was the kitchen, and on the wall, I could see a clear shadow of a woman who might be standing right around the corner. "Where should I bring it?" I asked. There was a moment before the woman answered. She half bent around the corner and revealed herself at the end of the hallway, gesturing for me to come in. But as she went back around the corner and out of sight, I realized that the shadow on the wall didn't move with her. It was the shadow of someone else standing somewhere around the corner. I stood there for a moment as I felt the blood rushing through my body. Then I carefully placed the bag and took a few steps back before turning and leaving the house. I stumbled into my car and looked back at the house as I drove away. In the front window, the shadow of a big man approached and watched as I left. I stopped at the nearest gas station to catch my breath and rethink everything that had happened. Clearly, from the way everything unfolded, it was some kind of trap, but I also knew that the police would only have my word as a basis. Eventually, I reported the incident, but when the police went to the woman's house to question her, she denied that anyone else was there and refused to give the officers permission to search her home. So, as I said, the police couldn't do anything at that time. The true intentions of the woman and the man in trying to lure me into their home were unknown, and I can only imagine that I wouldn't be here now if I had entered without thinking twice.